A button symbol in Flash Professional is a symbol with special states which serve to mimic familiar button behaviors. In this lesson, we examine the construction and use of this symbol type. So here we have what is basically a blank document, and I'm going to go in and create some assets here. So I'll choose the rectangle tool, or maybe I'll do the rectangle primitive tool instead, because it gives me a little more control over my corners and so forth. And I'm going to draw out a little rectangle here and adjust my corner radius. And then I'll go in and change the stroke. Let's make that a bit smaller. And I'll also change the fill. I want to use a gradient fill here. So I'm going to go actually into my color panel and change this to a linear gradient and simply make my adjustments in here. Okay, that should be pretty good. All right, so I'm going to now go into my gradient transform tool so that I can reposition this gradient like that. Okay, so that looks sort of like a button. So now that I have my assets prepared, I can select them with the selection tool, go to Modify, Convert to Symbol, and here I can name my symbol. So I'm going to just call it Button Basic. I can go into my type and choose from movie clip, button, or graphic. So I'm going to choose button for this example. So if I twirl down this advanced section here, we can see that just about everything is actually grayed out for me. However, I can choose to export for ActionScript within frame 1 or not. And whether you export in frame 1 or not depends upon what you need as far as preloaders go. And that's an entire other discussion. So we have to give this a class. So immediately it just inherits the symbol name as its class. And we have to define a base class. The base class is what our class is going to extend. So this base class is flash.display.simpleButton. We can also export this for runtime sharing if we want to, and provide a URL to that RSL file. Runtime shared libraries are used to share assets across different Flash projects. So we don't actually want to do any of this for this example, because we're just creating a simple basic button here. So I have my registration point set to the center, but lots of times with buttons, I actually prefer it in the upper left-hand corner because it makes laying things out on a grid a little bit easier. But you can do whatever you want. So I'll hit OK. And you can see there's my registration point in the upper left-hand corner. And here's my transform point in the center. And now that I have this selected, we can see that it is a button. I can swap out this button with another symbol if I want to. I can change the X and Y position, the width and the height. I can assign various color effects, such as brightness, tint, advanced settings, or alpha. I can also change display settings here. So perhaps I don't want that to be visible right away. You can always toggle the visibility of an element from this particular property right here. We can also choose the blending mode. So blending mode, what they do is they sort of change the appearance of objects based upon the blending mode and other objects that are directly above or below them. We can also choose how to render this object. So we're going to render it as it is, or we could always choose to cache it as a bitmap or export it as a bitmap. And these two are normally only used in mobile development. So we also have tracking, so whether to track as a button or a menu item. And then we have filters, so we could add things such as drop shadow, blur, glow, and so forth. So if we go into the library here, we can see that there is our button right here. And the icon for a button in the library looks like a little finger pressing down on a button, so it's very easy to tell what it is. I can, of course, drag other instances of this button from the library if I want to, and I can line them up into some sort of a menu like that. So buttons themselves have a very unique property to them. And if I go in and double click this button in the library and have a look at the timeline, we can see that we have 4 distinct frames in a button. We have the up, over, down, and hit states. So if I go through here, I can insert a frame by hitting F5, or a keyframe, or a blank frame. I'm going to insert a keyframe for each one of these. So now I have a unique object on each one of these frames. And doing that, I can actually go in and change what these things look like. So if I go into the Properties Inspector, remember this is just a basic shape. So perhaps I want this to highlight a bit on over, which is basically a hover state. And on down, perhaps I actually want it to get darker, like that. And then the hit state actually defines what part of the button the cursor has to interact with for the button to register as having some sort of interaction. And you can make this shaped however you want. It doesn't have to be the same size or shape as the visual elements of the button. So let's go back here, and what we'll do is test our movie. So Control, Test Movie, Test. So we can see as I roll over any of these instances, they all inherit that behavior. So their stroke turns very white, and if I press down on any of them, we can see that also the stroke turns black. So it's a fairly effective button as it is right here, I think. This lesson has been an example of how to create button elements and an examination of some of the properties that are unique to these elements.